The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and Audrey Lebeau almost didn't answer it. She was elbow-deep in a batch of puff pastry dough, her phone buzzing against the flour-dusted counter, the screen flashing a number she didn't recognize. Montreal area code. She wiped her hands on her apron. The big one, the one her mother had embroidered with little blueberries along the hem, and let it ring twice more before picking up. Lebeau Catering. Her voice was flat and professional because it was almost midnight, and she was tired and the pastry still needed 2 more folds. The man on the other end didn't say hello. I need 40 people fed by tomorrow at 6. Dinner. Full service. I was told you're the best in the city. Audrey looked at her dough. She looked at her calendar on the wall, where tomorrow was already blocked with 3 pickup orders and a consultation at 2. She looked at the stack of invoices on her desk that still weren't paid. Who's your contact? She asked. A pause. Gilles Moreau gave me your number. She knew Gilles. He'd hired her for his daughter's wedding 2 years ago, a sprawling affair in Outremont, where she'd served duck confit to 80 people in a kitchen the size of a coat closet. He'd tipped her generously and told her she was the best-kept secret in the city. Location? She said. Another pause. Longer this time. The Hargrove building. 42nd floor. The Hargrove building was not a place where ordinary people ate dinner. It was the kind of address that appeared in business sections of newspapers, the kind of glass tower that reflected the sky back at you like it was trying to make you feel small. Audrey had driven past it 100 times and never once imagined she'd have reason to go inside. Rate is double for last minute, she said. Non-negotiable. Menu approval is mine. Dietary restrictions by 7 a.m. And I need a loading dock number. I'm not hauling chafing dishes through a lobby. There was something that might have been a short, surprised sound. Not quite a laugh. I'll have someone send it to you. The line went dead. Audrey set her phone down, looked at her puff pastry dough, and said a word her mother would not have approved of. Then she got back to work. By 5 the next afternoon, Audrey Lebeau had slept for 3 hours, driven her van across the city twice, argued with her produce supplier over the phone while simultaneously deboning a chicken, and burned only one thing, a batch of candied walnuts that she'd left too long on the stove because her assistant Janine had called in sick with what she dramatically described as basically the flu but worse. She was used to working alone. She preferred it, mostly. At 31, she had built Lebeau Catering from a single commercial kitchen rental and a folding table into something real. A client list, a van, a reputation that traveled quietly through the kind of social circles that valued discretion over noise. She wasn't the cheapest option in Montreal. She wasn't trying to be. She was, as more than one person had noted without meaning it as a compliment, a large woman doing a physically demanding job, 5'5", solidly built, wearing a size 20 in the chef's coats she had custom made because the standard ones never fit right across the shoulders. She had dark hair she kept pinned back tightly, hands that were always a little flour-dusted, and the kind of calm, unhurried confidence that came from years of knowing exactly what she was doing in a kitchen. She loaded the van methodically, 12 containers stacked by course, linen napkins pressed and folded, her good chafing dishes, the ones with the solid brass handles. She'd designed the menu around what she had and what she could do well in a short window. A cream of celery root soup with truffle oil, a Quebec lamb rack with rosemary jus, roasted fingerling potatoes, a leek gratin, and for dessert her grandmother's sugar pie with chantilly cream. Simple, serious, Canadian. The loading dock number had arrived by text at 7:15 that morning, along with a single line, discretion expected. She'd read it, filed it away, and moved on. Discretion was her default. She'd fed cabinet ministers and people who were probably avoiding cabinet ministers and had never once talked about any of them. The Hargrove building's loading dock was clean and well lit, attended by a man in a dark suit, who looked at her van, looked at her, and looked at the van again. "Lebeau Catering?" he said, like he was confirming something he wasn't sure about. "That's what it says on the side," Audrey said pleasantly, and began unloading. He helped her, eventually. She hadn't asked him to. The service elevator was large enough for her cart. The 42nd floor opened into a corridor that was all dark wood paneling and recessed lighting, the kind of decor that communicated wealth without appearing to try. She was met by a young woman in a charcoal blazer who introduced herself as Veronique and spoke in the clipped, efficient tones of someone who managed logistics for a living. "The dining room is through here. The guests are. There's been a change in the timeline." "How much of a change?" Audrey asked, because in her experience that phrase meant something had gone wrong and nobody wanted to say so directly. Veronique's jaw tightened slightly. 45 minutes, possibly an hour. Mr. Hargrove's meeting is running long. I can hold the soup for an hour. The lamb I'll need to time more carefully." Veronique nodded and led her into a kitchen that was stocked like a showroom, beautiful equipment. Everything gleaming, nothing that showed signs of regular use. Audrey suppressed the instinct to feel affectionate about it. People with kitchens like this never actually cooked in them, which meant no one had burned anything into the oven racks, and the burners were probably calibrated properly. She set up, she organized. She tasted her lamb jus and added a small amount of salt, and felt the satisfaction of something done correctly. From down the corridor, behind closed doors, she could hear voices. Not what they were saying, just the rhythm of them. Something tense in the cadence. Stop and start. Multiple languages, she realized, which was unusual. She caught the shape of what might have been German, and then something that she was fairly sure was Korean. She kept working. It was 40 minutes later when the doors opened. She heard it rather than saw it. A rush of voices from the meeting room, louder now, and then someone speaking very quickly in what she now confirmed was German, their tone escalating in a way that needed no translation. Then a second voice, in English, clipped and controlled. "We need a moment." She was ladling soup into a warmed tureen when Veronique appeared in the kitchen doorway, her composure showing its first visible crack. "I need to ask you something unusual," Veronique said. Audrey looked up. "All right, do you speak?" Veronique stopped, seemed to recalibrate. "This is going to sound very strange." "Most things do after midnight," Audrey said. "What language?" Veronique blinked. "German. And possibly there's a gentleman who's been communicating through his assistant, but the assistant isn't here anymore, and we think possibly Mandarin or Cantonese. We're not entirely sure." Audrey set down her ladle. She looked at the tureen. She looked at Veronique. She thought about her grandmother's sugar pie cooling on the counter, and the invoice she still needed to send for the Côte des Neiges event, and the fact that she had not slept more than 3 hours and her feet hurt. "German I can do," she said. "If it's Cantonese, I can manage it. Mandarin too, though my tones in Mandarin are better than my Cantonese. I also have some Korean if that helps." Veronique stared at her. "The soup will stay warm for another 20 minutes, Audrey said. "And then I'll need to serve it regardless of what's happening in that room. So if you need me, now would be the time to ask." The meeting room looked like a negotiation and smelled like stress. There were 9 people seated around a long table of dark walnut, and 3 of them were standing, and the emotional temperature was somewhere between a tightly controlled argument and a barely prevented crisis. The windows behind them showed the Montreal skyline, going amber and blue as the evening settled in, indifferent to whatever was happening 42 floors below it. At the head of the table stood a man Audrey assumed was Hargrove. Not because he was the most visually imposing person in the room, though he was, but because everyone else was oriented toward him the way plants orient toward light, even when they're arguing with it. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, with a kind of face that must have been boyish once, and had grown into something more angular, more guarded. Charcoal suit. No tie. The sleeves of his dress shirt were rolled to the elbows, in a way that suggested the meeting had been going on long enough for pretense to be abandoned. His name, she would learn later, was Conrad Hargrove, and at the moment she walked in, he was looking at the man across the table from him with the particular expression of someone who has just realized the ground beneath them is less solid than they thought. The man across the table was speaking German, quickly, precisely, in the cadence of someone who had been waiting to say this, and was now saying all of it at once. Audrey walked into the room, set her notepad on the edge of the table because she needed somewhere to put her hands, and said quietly and in German, "He's saying that the terms of the initial agreement were conditional on the third-party audit being completed before the signature stage. He doesn't believe that condition was met, and he's not prepared to move forward until someone explains the discrepancy in the figures he was sent this morning." The room went very still. The man speaking German stopped mid-sentence. Conrad Hargrove turned and looked at her, really looked at her, for what she suspected was the first time. She was fully aware, a woman in a chef's apron with a small amount of rosemary jus on her left sleeve, standing in a room full of people in suits. She looked back at him evenly. "Who are you?" he said. "I'm your caterer," she said. "Your soup is going to be cold in 15 minutes. But first," she nodded toward the German speaker, "I think he has a legitimate question and you probably want to answer it." The German speaker, a compact man with silver-rimmed glasses who she would later learn was named Brandt, was staring at her with an expression caught somewhere between offense and intense curiosity. Audrey looked at him. "Ich kann übersetzen, wenn Sie möchten," she said. "I can translate if you'd like." Brandt looked at Conrad. Conrad made a gesture, brief, almost imperceptible, a slight opening of the hand that in any language meant, "Proceed." It took 40 minutes. The audit discrepancy was a formatting issue. 2 columns in a spreadsheet that had been exported differently across the German and English versions, creating what looked like a gap of $3 million, but was actually a rounding artifact. Once Audrey had translated the explanation carefully in both directions, and once Brandt's assistant had pulled up the original file on a laptop, and she'd pointed to the relevant columns in both languages, the tension in the room dropped by half. Then the Korean gentleman at the far end of the table, who had been silent for most of this, said something quietly to the man beside him. Audrey heard it. She glanced toward them. The man beside the Korean speaker, young, visibly uncomfortable, shook his head slightly. "If you'd like," Audrey said in careful Korean to the gentleman at the end of the table, "I can try to help. My Korean is decent but not perfect, so please correct me if I get something wrong." The gentleman, his name was Mr. Yoon, she'd caught it from a nameplate, looked at her with an expression she had seen before, though rarely directed at her. The specific look of someone recalibrating their entire understanding of a situation. He said something measured and precise. Audrey translated. "He says he appreciates the transparency in the audit explanation, but he has a separate concern about the delivery schedule in Clause 7, which, as written, gives his team no recourse if the primary supplier defaults after the 60-day mark." Conrad, who had been watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name, said, "Tell him we can amend that to 90 days with a secondary supplier clause. I'll have legal redraft it before end of week," she translated. Mr. Yoon nodded once, slowly. "D'accord," said the woman to Audrey's left in French, apparently to no one in particular. "That's actually a better clause for everyone." Audrey looked at her. "Vous travaillez en droit commercial? You work in commercial law." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Among other things." Audrey nodded. "Then you probably saw the same issue I did in Clause 12. The woman's eyebrow went higher. Then she smiled. A small, sharp, real smile. "Yes," she said, "I did." Conrad Hargrove was looking at Audrey with an expression that had moved past surprise and into something quieter and more attentive. "Clause 12, he said. The soup was served at 8:15. It was still warm, because Audrey had learned early in her career to prepare for things running longer than planned, and she'd held the temperature correctly. The lamb came out at 9, exactly timed. The leek gratin had developed a proper crust. The fingerling potatoes were crisp. She served the meal as she always did, efficiently and without fanfare, moving through the room and reading what was needed without being asked. Glasses refilled. A dietary restriction she'd been told about that morning, noted and accommodated without comment. The kind of professional service that most people received, without registering it consciously. Conrad Hargrove registered it. She noticed that he watched the room the way she did. Not constantly, not intrusively, but with a steady, peripheral awareness of what each person needed before they articulated it. It was the habit of someone who had spent a long time in charge of things. She recognized it the way you recognize a tool you use yourself. Brandt, who had arrived in the room as a problem, left it satisfied, having shaken hands with Conrad and said something in German that Audrey, from across the room, caught the shape of a compliment. She didn't translate it. It wasn't her job to translate compliments unless asked. By 10 o'clock, 7 of the 9 attendees had left. The commercial lawyer, whose name was Dr. Martin Boden, one of the senior partners at a firm Audrey recognized from the financial pages, lingered over her sugar pie and said, "This is extraordinary," with the particular reverence of a Quebecer encountering something made properly. "My grandmother's recipe," Audrey said. "Give her my compliments. She passed away in 2019, Audrey said. But I'll pass them along in my own way." Martin Borden looked at her for a moment with something genuine. "I think she'd be pleased," she said. Audrey began clearing the dessert plates. It was nearly 11 when Conrad Hargrove came into the kitchen. She was doing what she always did at the end of an event, restoring the space, packing her things with the same efficiency she'd arrived with, making sure nothing was left behind, and nothing was left worse than she'd found it. She heard him come in but didn't look up immediately because she was wrapping the remaining sugar pie to leave for the staff, and it required both hands. "You saved tonight," he said. She finished wrapping the pie, set it on the counter, then she looked at him. "I served dinner," she said. "You also negotiated my contract for 40 minutes in 3 languages. 2.5, she said. My Cantonese didn't come up. He had the look of a man who wasn't used to being corrected and wasn't sure how he felt about the fact that it didn't bother him. "Where did you?" He stopped, seemed to decide the question was too blunt. "You studied languages, University of Ottawa," she said. "Applied linguistics, minor in East Asian studies." She began folding her linens. "I graduated and couldn't get a translation job that paid well enough, so I went back to what I knew, catering. My mother ran a catering company. Her mother ran a bakery. I learned to cook the way I learned to speak, just kept doing it until it made sense." She set the folded linens in her crate. The combination turned out to be more useful than either thing alone. People underestimate what a good meal does for a negotiation. Conrad Hargrove leaned against the kitchen doorframe in a way that suggested he wasn't planning to leave immediately. She noted this without changing her pace. "Brandt has been a difficult negotiation for 8 months," he said. "He seemed reasonable to me," she said. "He had a legitimate concern, and he wanted it addressed, not dismissed. You addressed it. That was all he needed. His assistant usually translates. His assistant didn't understand the audit structure well enough to explain the rounding discrepancy accurately. The translation wasn't the problem. The technical knowledge was." Conrad was quiet for a moment. "How did you know that?" "Because he kept using the same German phrase and it kept landing wrong." She looked up at him. "He wasn't frustrated at you. He was frustrated that his own assistant wasn't conveying his meaning. Once I actually explained what he meant, he relaxed immediately." She paused. "You might consider having your legal team build in a technical translator protocol for international deals. Someone who understands both the language and the subject matter. It makes a significant difference." There was a silence that stretched a beat longer than a professional one. "I'll take that under advisement," Conrad Hargrove said. She looked at him directly. He had dark eyes and the particular expression of someone who had been in enough rooms with enough impressive people to know the difference between performance and substance, and who was currently recalibrating which category she fell into. She didn't make it easy for him. She never did. "Your kitchen is very clean for one that doesn't get used," she said, returning to her packing. "Whoever you're paying to maintain it is doing a good job. I'll tell them you said so. Tell them to check the calibration on the left rear burner as well. It's running about 15 degrees hot. Hasn't mattered yet, but it would matter if someone actually cooked here." He blinked. "I noticed it when I was timing the lamb," she said simply. He called her the next morning. She was in her van, coffee in the cup holder, reviewing her schedule for the week on her phone in a parking lot outside her supplier's warehouse. The same unrecognized number, the same direct manner. "I have an event in 3 weeks," he said. 60 people, 2 evenings. I'll need lead time on the menu and a full dietary list by. I'd also like to retain you as a language resource for the duration. There are 3 international guests attending who don't have translators arranged." Audrey looked at her coffee. "That's a different service from catering," she said. "I'm aware. I'll compensate accordingly. My catering rate for 60 people over 2 evenings is—" She told him, "Fine, the language consultation is separate. I charge." She named a rate she had never actually charged anyone before because no one had ever asked, but which she felt was appropriate given what had happened the previous evening and the principle which she held firmly, that being good at more than one thing did not mean you provided the second thing for free. Conrad Hargrove didn't hesitate. "Fine. I'll need to know what languages and what subject matter. I can prepare. I'll have Veronique send the briefing materials." A pause. Outside the warehouse, a truck was backing up, beeping rhythmically. "The sugar pie," he said. "My assistant told me you left the rest of it for the cleaning staff. It would have gone to waste otherwise. She also told me it was the best thing she'd eaten in a year." "Your cleaning staff has excellent taste," Audrey said. "I'll see you in 3 weeks, Mr. Hargrove." She ended the call, picked up her coffee, took a sip. Her phone buzzed. A message from Veronique with a subject line that read, "Briefing materials, Hargrove Consulting International Dinner, October 14 to 15. Below it, a PDF attachment and 2 more files." She opened the first one. The guests included a legal representative from a Berlin infrastructure firm, the director of a Tokyo-based logistics company, and a Nairobi-based investment group that operated in both English and Swahili. Audrey set down her coffee. She looked at the windshield, at the parking lot, at the ordinary Tuesday morning going on around her. Then she put the van in reverse and started going through vocabulary in her head, the way she'd been doing since she was 9 years old, picking up languages the way other people picked up habits, quietly, steadily, without particularly meaning to, until one day she simply had them. The October dinner was held over 2 evenings as promised. The first evening went smoothly. The Berlin representative was precise and formal, and relaxed considerably after the first course when Audrey, moving between the kitchen and the dining room, had a brief exchange with her in German that made the woman laugh unexpectedly, a short, real laugh that clearly surprised her. The logistics director from Tokyo spoke limited English but excellent French, which Audrey discovered during the appetizer course and quietly relayed to Conrad, who rearranged the seating for the second course, so the director was beside Martine Boden, who had been invited again and who spent the rest of the evening in an animated, delighted conversation that appeared to be about contract law and the best ramen in Paris. Conrad watched all of this. She was aware of him watching. She didn't perform for it. The second evening was harder. The investment group's director, a woman named Amara Osi, who arrived with the particular composure of someone who had been in too many rooms where people underestimated her and had stopped finding it surprising, had a specific concern about the proposed partnership structure that her counterpart on Conrad's team was not addressing adequately. Audrey caught this during the main course. Not a language issue, precisely, but a frame of reference issue. Amara was speaking to the wrong level of abstraction, and Conrad's team kept translating her concern into a smaller, more manageable version of itself. Audrey set down the platter she was holding in the kitchen alone and made a decision. She went back into the dining room. "Excuse me," she said to the table, to Amara specifically. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to check whether you needed anything else from the kitchen, but I also heard part of your earlier exchange about the revenue-sharing structure, and I think there may be a framing issue worth identifying." Amara Ose looked at her with sharp, measuring eyes. "Go on," she said. "Your concern, as I understand it, isn't with the percentage structure itself. It's with what happens to the percentage base if the underlying asset valuation shifts post-signature. That's a different question from the one the current clause answers." She looked at Conrad, and I think if that question were asked directly, it would get a different response. There was a silence. Conrad looked at her with an expression she was beginning to learn, the particular stillness of someone who was thinking very quickly behind a calm face. "That's correct," Amara said quietly. "That's exactly the question." Conrad turned to his legal team. "Revised Clause 9, he said. Asset valuation trigger. Make it explicit." His legal team, to their credit, didn't look surprised. They looked as though they were writing very fast. Amara Ose looked at Audrey. "You're the caterer," she said, with the tone of someone for whom this was not actually a small thing. "Yes," Audrey said. "You're also something else." Audrey picked up the empty platter she'd set down. "I'm someone whose grandmother taught her that feeding people well and listening to them carefully are the same skill," she said. "I'll let you know when dessert is ready." At the end of the second evening, when the guests had gone, and Veronique was organizing the documents left behind, and Conrad's team was packing up their materials, Audrey was in the kitchen, loading the last of her containers, when Conrad came in again. "Amara Ose asked me who you were," he said. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were my caterer." A pause. "She said I was underselling it." Audrey latched the container. "She's perceptive. She asked if you were available for an event in Nairobi in February." Audrey straightened up and looked at him. "I told her I didn't know your schedule," he said, "and that I'd have to ask you. After I determined whether I could justify continuing to use the word caterer as a complete description of what you do," she looked at him steadily. "I'm a caterer," she said. "That's not a diminishment. It's what I do, and I do it well, and it is the reason I was in this building in the first place, which means it is the reason any of the rest of this happened." "I know," he said. "I didn't mean it as one." She studied him. He looked back at her with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, careful, present, not trying to fill the silence. "The Nairobi event," she said. "What's the context?" "Infrastructure summit. 8 countries, formal dinners both evenings, working lunch on the third day." He paused. "And the language situation is complicated. At minimum, 4, possibly 6. There's a delegation from the Eastern DRC that we haven't confirmed yet. French and Swahili I can do. Some Lingala, though it's been a while. I'd need time to refresh." She looked at the ceiling briefly, running a mental calculation. "The food logistics for a summit like that are significant. I'd need a local kitchen partner in Nairobi who I could vet in advance." Conrad's expression shifted. The stillness of it changed quality, from careful to something more open. "You're considering it," he said. "I'm telling you what it would take," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It's more useful." She said yes 3 days later, via email, in a message that was 5 sentences long and outlined her requirements, her rate, her timeline for preparation, and a single question about the DRC delegation's confirmation status. Conrad replied in 4 sentences, confirmed the delegation, agreed to the terms, and at the end added, "The sugar pie. Would you be willing to share the recipe? My assistant has asked twice." Audrey read this in her kitchen at 7 in the morning, flour on her hands again, a new batch of something on the counter. She typed back, "No, but if she's in Montreal, she's welcome to come watch me make it. That's how my grandmother taught me, and it's how I teach." His response came 40 minutes later. She'd expected silence or a polite acknowledgement. Instead, "She'll take you up on that. So will I, if the invitation is open." Audrey set down her phone. Outside her kitchen window, Montreal was doing what Montreal does in October, turning beautiful and a little melancholy, the maples going amber and the light going sideways and gold. She'd lived here her whole life. She knew every version of this city in every season. She thought about Nairobi in February. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of butter and vanilla, and something just barely caramelizing. She thought about all the rooms she had walked into, and all the moments where someone had looked at her and decided, on the basis of a single visible fact, that they knew what she was. She thought about the way Conrad Hargrove had looked at her. Not the first time, when he hadn't looked at all, but every time after, when he looked the way people look when they're paying actual attention. She typed, "The invitation is open. Bring nothing, I'll have everything you need." She hit send. Then she turned back to her counter, and her flour, and the work that was hers and that she was good at, and that had taken her, without her ever quite planning it, exactly where she was supposed to be.